Everybody, thank you for being here today. We really very much appreciate it. I want to introduce to you all Alan Stillman. He is the founder and CEO of Kwikpoint, and Kwikpoint is a maker of some visual communication tools that use simple, recognizable pictures to overcome language barriers with anyone, anywhere in the world. It is pretty fascinating stuff. There are more than 8 million of these in use today in the world, and we are really excited by travelers, medical staff, law enforcement, and especially the military. It's really exciting that we have with us today, kicking off and giving a presentation, Mr. Alan Stillman.
Thank you for your time today, and what I'm going to be doing is just telling you a little bit about the story of how the company came to be, a little bit about where we are now, and then the vision of where we hope to go. And hopefully you'll find this interesting and maybe something useful. And in addition, we have some samples to give you that'll be in the back. So the story starts with me, age 20. That's me, and that's just after I got out of college, and I weighed about 335 pounds and didn't like that, and that's a whole story in itself. And I decided to get into using exercise bikes to lose weight, and I lost about 110 pounds using life cycles. You've probably seen them in health clubs. Do we want lights?
Can you turn those lights back off, please? Thank you.
And after losing 100 and some pounds, I got this idea to ride a bicycle around the world, got Lifecycle to sponsor me, and set off on a 2.5-year journey. From age 24 to 26, I lived on a bicycle in 28 countries all over the world, pedaling about 15,000 miles. And this is just a shot, kind of a cool shot for a world bike trip at a grounds in Vienna, Austria, at a park. And this sort of shows that I kind of lived on farms and had a tent and met people all over the world. And while I was traveling, I had language barriers, and I only spoke a little bit of high school French, a little bit of high school German, and came up with the idea to, well, just a side note, it was a trip to promote world peace. And I spent about a year in the Middle East, and one of the more interesting things I did is I spent time interviewing the PLO in Syria, trying to understand why there was so much hate going on in the world. And in retrospect, I'm Jewish, not religious, but born Jewish, and I didn't quite realize I was sort of walking into PLO headquarters in Damascus, kind of saying, tell me about peace. So a little bit of a, naivety there maybe, but I made it back to tell about it. This is actually on the West Bank at a peace rally, and I spent a lot of time just trying to understand why there was so much hate in the Middle East. And but that's a little bit of a side note to the story. But during my trip, I would get ideas, and I'd get all sorts of ideas. And one of the ideas I got was, hey, wouldn't it be cool to have a picture dictionary so that I could be any place in the world and just point to a picture and communicate a basic idea, like I'd like a glass of water, where's the bathroom, rather than having to learn the language or have a dictionary. So when I came back to the States, I pulled out my idea book, and you see picture dictionary. November 11th, 1987 was the idea, just above unicycle jousting, and decided that was the idea I was going to start for one of many ideas I had. And so I came back to the States, and this is back in the heyday of desktop publishing, when illustrations were done kind of painstakingly on something called Illustrator 88, and I was able to make a deal with a number of students at a local community college, Nova Alexandria, that I would teach them desktop publishing if they would draw pictures for me. And so we did these little swaps. They would draw a picture, I would teach them a tool, because I had a background in math and IT and was pretty proficient in computers. And so this was my home-based office just down the street on Duke Street, and it was on Early Street, and you can kind of see kind of classic home-based entrepreneur. This house was kind of designed to not have 8 people working out of it, and it didn't really have the infrastructure or the IT support, but we made it happen. And what you see there is the cover of my very first card. It got published 20 years ago, actually just over 20 years ago in 1991. The basic idea was pictures to communicate in a card format. And I went on and started being able to find corporate markets for these publications, one of the key ones being the Olympics. And over the course of a number of years, I got a number of Olympic Games to adopt this and use it as promotions. You could imagine giving away to the travelers and athletes, families of the athletes at the Olympic Games. And I evolved into the corporate marketplace, and these are all customers that I developed over about a 10-year period. Companies like the idea of this little picture card. They like putting their name on it and giving it away as a promotion. And that became my main form of distribution. I did some retail and stuff, but it was really hard with one product that sold for $4 that therefore bookstores bought for $2, therefore distributors bought for $1.25, and I printed for $1 to kind of make a living. But I did find that corporate markets were a lot better. And then September 11th happened, and that completely rocked the world. And as a microcosm, it rocked my little business world because my corporate space was the travel companies. I sold to airlines, I sold to Olympics, I sold to tour operators and travel agents. And in September of 2011, nobody was going anyplace except for one particular user group, the United States military. And on September 14th, 2001, serendipitously, I got an email from a major in the Marine Corps, MAR-4 PAC, and he said, I've been using your travel card to communicate all over the world, but it would really help soldiers a lot if you could add some military imagery to it. And that led to me developing a series of products for the United States military. Here you see a soldier in Iraq communicating with locals, but rather than the dialogue of where's the bathroom, can I get cheese with that burger kind of thing, it was more like where's the bomb. So it sort of just changed the vocabulary, but not the concept. And that just led to, now we work extensively with the United States military. We're standard issue for effectively every soldier that goes abroad. So that's kind of just, this is my segue slide. That's sort of the 2-minute history of riding the bike around the world, probably more than 2 minutes. What happened? This is one of my favorite shots. This is outside of Everest Base Camp, and it just sort of shows, somebody being able to communicate with Sherpas, and it was sort of cool to get to Everest, because, the ends of the earth. What I'm going to do next is just overview the capabilities of visual language. To me, what I just showed you is visual language to cross a language barrier that allowed two people not to speak. Now I think of visual language as having 3 fundamental applications. The first one allows two people who don't share a common language to share an idea through a picture, and that's what I was talking about so far. The second one is what I call visual user guides. You're all familiar with that. Anyone that's put together a child's toy, IKEA furniture, a file cabinet, a barbecue, has probably used instructions that have some diagrams in it. But my guess is if you're like most people, it's not always been much of a win for you. That sometimes you put together these things and it's not that much fun, and maybe you throw the instructions away. And so we've realized that by using our expertise in visual language to cross language barriers, we can also cross barriers of things like how to understand to put together a product. And the third is what I call visual reference guides. And that's simply information that better conveys visually. So I sort of say our space is people to people, people to product, or people to profession, or people to purpose. The purpose in this last one is how would you give CPR? So let's start with people to people. I'm just going to overview within the people, or what I call the visual language translator domain, a couple of examples in the 3 spaces we work in: travel, military, and health. So travel, that was our premier publication. We actually used visual language to show the idea because people didn't really understand what this thing was. So we had to come up with a picture to explain the concept, kind of a self-referential within visual language. And there's me using it recently. I was out in Peru in Machu Picchu. What we found is that we could cover a lot of information if we color-coded things for primary navigation. So you'll see there's 4 basic colors there, and there's basic categories. The 2 things you do most is you go to restaurants and then you specify what you want to eat, shelter, and then work and play. And so it was a nice way to visually index things, and by simple color coding you could very quickly get to a relevant category. Then within a category we learned that we could sub-index by working shades of the color. So you see right here, this is just one task for work. You can see it's a little bit outdated. Probably not many of you are asking for floppy disks, though you'd be surprised in a few parts of the world they're still used. But I think you get the idea. Another thing we learned is that you can do a lot more than just have a picture of a thing, right? We all sort of get, picture of a thing. I kind of sometimes joke that visual language translators is about the oldest idea there is. And when you think about it, when did pointing to pictures start? On my trips, I passed through France, and I went to some caves in Lascaux, and had these famous cave paintings, and maybe you know them. They're these cave paintings, and they're like paintings of bisons. And what was really going on there? Somebody was simply saying, hey, if you see one of these, eat it. Or, have you seen any of these? Oh, it's on the other side of the river. So, in many ways, I'm really just reworking a very old idea. Thank God they didn't, get IP rights back then. But, that's really the concept. But then we went on to realize that we can do quite a bit more. This is what I call a conceptual frame. If you put this all together, you can kind of ask a question about time, a question about what time a plane takes off, or plane lands, or use that same pattern to ask it about other things. And from a traveler's perspective, departure and arrival is a really important question to get right when you're in a foreign part of the world and you don't speak the language. I also found that there's no reason to only use pictures. Pictures and words really go very well together. We've got eyes and ears. And so by combining certain keywords and pictures together, you've got a much more robust capability to have a two-way dialogue. And that's the whole goal. Allow two people who don't share a common language to be able to have a meaningful dialogue on a specific area, in this case, travel. This was one of our more interesting products that we did for the Beijing Games. There's a sample that's out there. This is for the Beijing Olympics, and what was relevant there is in China they eat some things that are not my favorites, including snakes and rats and things. And so we learned from doing some interviews that people were more concerned about what they didn't want to eat when they were in China than what they did want to eat. So this simply allows you to say, kind of no pets, no critters, just got that kind of thing. This was, not sure what that one is. This here is another piece of the one we did for the games. This was sort of a cool application. We took the various sports and we created a calendar that was visual centric by the sport with the dates under it. And then a couple other things we did around maps and infographics. And what's that one? Oh, now's the one where we go to the video, right? And this was taken a few weeks ago. I was in Ecuador, and I just thought it would be fun to show it really being used. So I actually pulled it out. This is like not staged. This is like my girlfriend pulling out the iPhone. Let's use it and capture it. So this is 2 minutes of production went into this.
He loves to show off.
So she wants, what did you want, David?
Rice and guacamole.
Rice, guacamole.
Guacamole, no guacamole.
No guacamole.
And
Beans.
Pico de gallo.
And maybe some vegetables too.
Pico de gallo and vegetable.
Ensalada.
Salada, sí.
Y brócoli. Papas, potatoes.
Potatoes. And agua.
Agua sin gas, agua con gas.
Right, dos agua.
Dos aguas sin gas.
And dos agua.
No ice.
No ice. Right, no ice. ¿Tú fajita?
Fajita, carne, beef fajita. Chicken fajita.
Actually becomes a nice way to learn the language as you travel as well.
Fajita.
See?
Yeah, okay.
Oh, yummy, yummy.
So, nothing like seeing the real thing in action. Okay, next slide. So that was kind of an overview of travel within this visual language person-to-person capability. Now let's jump to military. And next slide. Oh, next slide. Oh, me. Okay. So these are two titles. These titles became standard publications for every soldier going to Iraq and Afghanistan. You may know the term IED, improvised explosive device. They're essentially the roadside bombs you hear about in the papers daily that are the #1 cause of casualties in both Iraq and Afghanistan. #1 cause of casualties not just for U.S. and NATO troops, but for everyone. Just everyone. That's what's causing all the death in Iraq and Afghanistan are these bombs. And so we went ahead and worked with the military to create a series of publications around communicating around IEDs. And if you look at the photo here, this is, a Pashtun elder. And when you think about it, these bombs get planted. They're planted by, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, various militants there. And they're planted in these little villages. And the people that live in these villages, they have no more desire to see these bombs go off than do U.S. and NATO forces. These bombs are pretty indiscriminate in how they kill people. And so this allows this grandfather to be able to tell this soldier where this bomb is. And as a result of that, bombs get found. We had an example in Fallujah last year where a dialogue like this happened. They followed a teenager down into a basement and they found 500 IED components. It's 500 bombs that will never go out and be deployed. How many of them would have actually been successfully detonated? I don't know. But even if it was 10%, even if it was 1%, every time one of those bombs goes off, you hear in the Post 5 dead, 15 dead, 75 dead. So it's a pretty important thing to find these bombs. And what it looks like is this guy's literally, pointing to this card. He sees images like that, points to the images, and it results in the soldier having intelligence or information that results in these bombs being found. And based on data, we estimate that some tens of thousands of IEDs have been found as a result of the communications or intelligence that happened because of these cards. This actually shows you just kind of a blow-up. One of the ideas we worked with the U.S. military is that the best way to stop a bomb is to find it before it's made. So how do you find a bomb before it's made? Well, you look for the indicators of bomb making, which are the components, the precursor components. So this takes the basic precursors of a bomb, which essentially are the explosive elements in the upper left corner, the various components that go with it, the tools, and the triggers, and this sort of, again, a little bit of a conceptual frame. And so if you go behind a garage door and it's supposed to be a mechanic shop, but he's got 100 cell phones laying on the ground with some bags of ammonium nitrate, you start to go, wait a second, what's wrong with this picture? And that becomes a way to find these bomb factories, because they're all covert factories. They all look like shops and warehouses and people's basements, but in reality, they're making lethal weaponry. So this just shows some of the different things you can do with pictures. You can ask, where it is on the landscape, and get information like that. Another thing that I didn't know till I started working with the military is the military also provides a lot of medical aid in the various places where they go. And so it's actually allowed the troops and the medics to better communicate with the locals when they do provide medical care. And now we go to next video. This is just some stories of soldiers that had used it.
The visual translator was helpful to us during our deployment in Iraq last year. People were coming to us and telling us that there was a potential ambush that was going to happen at a certain time and place, but we didn't understand what they were saying. So the graphic training aid assisted us in actually communicating from us to them and back to prevent accidents and incidents from happening, and to also allow us to investigate claims by the Iraqi citizens of things that were going on inside their neighborhoods, and it helped us a lot during our deployment. I think it did save some lives, both soldiers and Iraqi citizens, by allowing us or allowing the Iraqi citizens to communicate to us potential hazards.
Well, if we hadn't had Kwikpoint, wouldn't been able to drop all our initial safeties that we take when we go down range. When the locals would report an improvised explosive device, just various models of pictures narrowed it down as to what we had, so we had a better clue before we approached it.
Another time we had used a Kwikpoint, some locals had shown us the picture in a Kwikpoint pamphlet of a weapons cache in the lake. Using the Kwikpoint, we were able to determine where bombers were hiding, where snipers were hiding. We were determining how many people were in an attack group, where the attack group headed to. I believe that the Kwikpoint is mission essential because it helped us communicate with the locals, it helped us to save lives, it helped us find weapons caches, identify where IEDs were, it helped us communicate with detainees, and it just made everyday life easier in Iraq.
Just to give you a sense of how much it's used, last October there's a large Army show, some of you may know of it, called AUSA. It's the largest military show of the year. It was at the convention center, and whenever somebody comes up to the booth, I just simply say, you know, are you familiar with our products? And this one soldier came up to me and said, yeah. He goes, quite frankly, I'm here because of it. And I say, excuse me? And he goes, that, you know, on 3 separate occasions when I was on patrol in Afghanistan, I was able to get information and found out there were bombs that were on my route, you know, my patrol route. And we got information 3 times and found those bombs rather than having them detonate during our convoy. And he said to me, you know, thank you, you know, and just like, it was like, thank you, you know. One of the things he said, which was kind of interesting, is he said that because this is now standard issue, the Afghans know that the troops have them, and the troops carry them in these little cargo pockets that kind of go right here, so that when an Afghan citizen wants to talk, they walk up to a soldier and they go, and they just gesture, and that's the gesture for pull out your Kwikpoint, I want to tell you something. And it's sort of cool to learn that this sort of gesture has a little evolved in Afghan areas just based on this product being out there 5 years. This is just some of the different feedback we've gotten. In 2004, it was added to a list called Mission Soldier Essential Equipment. That's a fancy way of saying it became standard issue. Every soldier has to have one on them. It's actually an inspectable item before you can go into the field in Iraq and Afghanistan. Richard Myers, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, just acknowledged it, and it was put into the official Senate report language. So that was, again, visual language translators, military. Now I'm going to shift to health. Same issue, crossing the language barrier, but different topic, health, not military. So same thing, cover of one of our products. Basic idea, this is applicable in the United States or overseas. Somebody needs to communicate something and they can't speak. Maybe they can't speak because they don't share a language. Maybe they can't speak because they're unable to speak for physical, medical reasons. But you can get an idea across. This is kind of an overview of one of the products. Again, you see this same kind of color coding within section to help you get through different categories. Same concept of big ideas, cut, you know, swallowed something, falls, car accidents. One of the most used images is the concept of a pain scale. You've probably all heard that question, you know, where does it hurt and how much does it hurt? Probably the top 2 questions that doctors ask, particularly after trauma. Well, so again, we allow you to point to it and kind of give it a 1 to 10 and just use these simple metaphors reinforced by Spanish. But we're able to sort of take it to the next level and add a little bit visually on the quality of the pain. So if you look on the right, you can actually communicate the concept of a sharp pain, a dull pain, a burning pain, a banging pain, and even the concept of an intermittent or continuous pain. You know, intermittent, sad face, happy face, sad face. That's intermittent. Sad, 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 continuous. So you start to be able to do things with visual language that work better visually than they necessarily do through words. People may not even know, you know, well, is that intermittent or continuous? Well, somebody who barely speaks English might not get that, but they probably get continuous pain or the pain comes and goes. So there's some inherent advantages to using visual as your dominant form of communication in certain domains. Basic question, what did the kid swallow? Again, imagine the scenario. Some woman rushes into an ER, she's screaming, you know, her kid's crying. You kind of get that the kid swallowed something, but until you get the interpreter there to figure out what the kid swallowed, it's a completely different protocol for poison than for razor blades. Completely different set of things that have to happen. You know, completely different set of protocols for one chemical over another. Completely different if it's an allergic reaction versus a poison reaction. And again, getting that piece of information in real time, you know, can make literally life-saving difference. We were awarded a patent for this. And actually, they used this one in the patent award. The basic concept of taking sets of pictures and using them in a method to advance communication was actually a unique idea, and we were happy to learn. In addition, there are some things you kind of have to talk about in healthcare, but you might not want to use photos, you know, and you may not even want to do much else, but they're important, you know? I mean, these are important things, so I'll let these pictures speak for themselves. We've also found applications in disaster relief, you know, shelters. We were used quite a bit in Haiti, quite a bit in Katrina during, you know, the various disasters. New York City is doing a program with us. Again, imagine the basic scenario of there's a fire and this person runs out of their house, they're screaming, they're crying, they want the fireman to go back in. Why do they want that fireman to go back in? Is it to look for a pet? Is it to look for a child? That kind of might affect how the fireman treats that communication. And if you could just tell the fireman, yeah, there's a cat in the basement. Oh, okay. No, there's a baby on the second floor. At that time, that piece of information is really important, and you just want a really clear understanding right then and there. This is in global health, a mission in Liberia. Turns out with children often do better with pictures than with words. They're used to it. You know, it's kind of their domain. Kids are really into pictures. And so often a child will show you something they might not be able to say. Things they might be embarrassed to say, might not have the vocabulary, but they'd happily show you the picture. So it can do quite a bit with pediatric communications. This is one of my favorite examples of how, or what I like to say, visual language saves lives. About 4 or 5 years ago, we made a decision. We wanted to get involved in global health and see where we could make a difference. And so we looked at the various infectious disease killers in global health, and you may know HIV/AIDS, TB, and malaria are the big three. And within TB, we learned that about 1.5 million people a year die of tuberculosis. 1.5 million, really big number. And when we did a little research, we found out that the medications for TB have been around for a long time. The patents have expired, so these are sort of inexpensive generic medications for a disease that's very diagnosable and treatable. So why such a high fatality rate? Well, one of the main reasons was diagnostics. People don't know they have it. If you don't know you have it, you can't be treated for it. Well, the way that they diagnose for TB in the developing world is something called a sputum smear microscopy. And like those kind of $10 words sound, it means you take some sputum and you smear it on a microscope. Well, that test, which is the diagnostic in the developing world, has about a 70% false negative rate. And what that means is for every 10 people that travel halfway across their town to go to this little clinic and actually have TB, they're coughing, they've got blood in the cough, they're really not doing well. For every 10 who actually have it, 7 are told they don't have it. Nope, you just have a cough, go on home. They go on home to die and to spread the disease. And one of the main reasons is this test isn't done right. And if you look at this picture now, there's 3 key points. One is you need to have a clean mouth. If you've got anything in your mouth, tobacco, food, any debris, it'll contaminate the sample. The second is you have to take deep abdominal breaths to give sputum. if you give saliva, the bacillus doesn't exist in saliva. It only exists in the actual sputum, the lung fluid. Well, again, you know, these are subtle distinctions, but it makes all the difference in the world. So we got a grant with USAID, and there's now 20,000 of these being tested in about, 10 African countries, primarily in South Africa. And our hope is that the WHO will eventually adopt this, and it will be at every TB clinic in the world. And that someday from now, that rather than saying there's a death toll of 1.3 million, that number will be lower, and one of the reasons will be better diagnostics because this test is actually administered correctly. So, you know, it just to me says how a simple picture, you know, the most difficult thing was not developing this picture. It was convincing USAID, the South African Ministry of Health, 5 NGO partners, the Stop TB Working Committee, to actually put it in a clinic in South Africa. That was the hard part. And this is actually a clinic of one being used. And now we're going to jump to a video. And this is an example of a medical application in Iraq. A little girl had swallowed gasoline. And we actually met the soldier who helped treat the little girl who had swallowed gasoline. So let her take it from there.
We had set up a traffic control point, and a man had come running up toward us from the back of the line, and he was just running at us yelling hospital. We used the Kwikpoint to ask him questions of why he needed a hospital, and using the Kwikpoint, he pointed to a picture of a gas pump and to a picture of a little girl and made the drink symbol to us. And when he'd done that, we determined that the little girl had drank gasoline. When we got to the car, we had looked in, and the little girl was laying in the back seat with her head on her mother's lap. Her skin was pale and clammy. Her eyes were glazed over. She wasn't moving. She looked to be 5 or 6 years old. And by the way she looked, we determined that she did drink gasoline. I believe that using the Kwikpoint to find out exactly what had happened saved his little girl's life.
We got that story just before our holiday lunch in 2005, and it felt like it was sort of the gift to our company that we kind of walked into the holiday season knowing that, you know, a little girl was alive, and our team contributed to it. So I talked for the last 10 or 15 minutes about visual language translators. It's now going to go a little quicker. The second thing is the concept of using pictures to assemble things, visual user guides. When a bomb goes off, it creates a shock wave. And when the shock wave hits a soldier's head, it creates a concussion against the head, which often can result in traumatic brain injury or death. So the military said, wow, why don't we put suspension pads into these helmets, kind of like you all have in your bicycle helmets, you know, brilliant idea, right? Shock and heads, we kind of knew that from bicycling, but the military caught on with that. And they went out and they asked manufacturers to make products that did it, and they found manufacturers to do it. And it went out, this is one of the manufacturers, Skydex, and it went out with these sort of black and white classical instructions, and some of the soldiers were either not assembling it correctly or throwing the whole thing away because it looked annoying, you know? And so we came in and we said, let us redesign the instructions. And all of a sudden, by using these sort of visual-centric instructions that were more engaging and clearer, people were actually putting the things on and thus protecting their heads from shock waves and blasts and concussions. After that, the military decided to provide it to the Afghan National Army. Well, now we had an audience that was low literate or illiterate, so we had to redesign it again and make it purely visual, 100% visual, just a couple little marks there. And so again, it shows the power of what you can do with well-designed visual language. This is a typical military manual. This is that same manual that we did a redesign on. This is for body armor. It takes 51 steps to put on the United States Army's body armor. You get a step wrong, your kidney's not protected, your collarbone's not protected. You know, it's got like 30 parts, 50 steps. So again, we used this approach and made it a little bit easier to appropriately darn their gear. Now, visual user guides for health. Okay, female condoms. Maybe most of you or some of you have heard of them. I'm not going to ask who uses them. But they decided to do a program to bring female condoms into the developing world, which is sort of a cool concept because it empowers women to be able to protect themselves against HIV, AIDS, and pregnancy rather than depending on the man. But the thing about a female condom is it's not that obvious to use. And there were all these stories about people using them to make soccer balls, fill them with soda. Like the stories go on how female condoms are used for anything other than contraception. So as an act of social service, we worked with the UNFPA and designed instructions to go out with female condoms for primarily Africa, a few other areas of the world. Another example, this is a splint. If you look at it, you see it's kind of a diagram of it in the lower left. You know, it's kind of a complicated thing. It's got straps and stretchy parts and stringy parts, and it's dangly. Not a really intuitive thing to use. You could imagine text-heavy instructions trying to explain, you know, how the Velcro thing stretches and pulls and twists. Like, you know, you kind of lose it. But again, pictures, it just kind of clears it out. So I talked about three basic areas: person to person, person to product, and this is the third one, people to purpose, which is sort of the broadest one. Again, military. I'm going to jump to this one. IED reference guides. There's a lot to know if you're going to be dealing with IEDs all over the world. A lot of details, and we want it to be clear and simple. So we've come up with visual-based reference guides. I kind of think of it as like Cliff Notes on steroids. We just take everything and make it super visual. Here's probably a better example. A lot of troops were involved in detainee operations, which means essentially they became prison guards. When you're guarding someone, one of the tactics is handcuffing. There's actually ways to handcuff that are more humane than others, and again, visual lends itself to explaining that process. Or we just produced a 300-page book for the U.S. military. It's the premier publication that teaches troops how to counter IEDs, and again, we made it using visual language. Healthcare. This is an example of visual reference guide for TB. Again, a low literacy audience. You want to give them best practices. You want to help them understand how to prevent transmission and gear it toward that population. In the same way that pictures work well with children, pictures are great for healthcare, for low literacy, and even for low health literacy audiences. Here's one we did for Project Hope for diabetes. You can see obviously it's in Hindi. But again, this was the first diabetes project launched in India. 30 million people in India, they have no diabetes public health collateral. And so we're kind of excited to be part of that. I'm now going to jump for a second. I started by giving you a little bit of the background to the story, and I just did an overview of the three areas: visual language translators, visual user guides, and visual reference guides we did in 3 domains. Hopefully I haven't confused you by doing like 9 ideas visually, verbally. But now I'm jumping to what I call the future. There's a term I heard not too long ago called a big, hairy, audacious goal. What you're looking at there is a picture of my grandmother, and my grandmother had a stroke when I was 12 years old. And the thing about strokes, and I didn't know this till not too long ago, is that if you realize that somebody's having a stroke and you're able to really, identify it, kind of do a test and go, wow, that person's having a stroke, and you get them to a hospital within 3 hours, there's a pretty good chance they can completely alleviate the stroke. There's something called a clot buster, and basically it breaks up the thing that blocks the blood flow, the airflow to your brain, and you're fine. But there's 2 key parts. One is knowing that you got a 3-hour window, and the second is knowing the 3 things to check for. And only 1 in 10 Americans knows those things right now. Only 1 in 10. And so I have this goal that, can I bring that number up to 9 in 10? And really very heartfelt to me because when I was 12 years old, I watched my grandmother not be able to speak, and we didn't know what was going on. My mother didn't know what was going on, and she sat in the bed for a day. This is way back when, and after the next day, I literally went to my mother at age 12, and I said, no one lies in bed for a day unable to speak. It can't just be, my mother didn't know, was it medication, was it diabetes, she just didn't know what it was. And we finally called the ambulance, and she went to the hospital, and she had permanent aphasia, which means she could never speak again. And that's a picture of her shortly before she died. And I remember I would be 12 or 13 years old, and I would go to the hospital, and I'd see her, nursing home, and I didn't understand that she still had her cognitive ability, but she couldn't speak, and I eventually stopped going because I thought she was kind of like a vegetable. I didn't get from my 12-year-old lens that you can not speak and still be able to fully be there. And then later on, when I was an adult, I felt so much remorse because here was my grandmother. We were poor. We were on welfare. So she was living in a nursing home for people that are destitute, kind of those kinds of nursing homes. So it wasn't a very nice place at the time. My mother was ill and in the hospital, and I was her only grandchild, her only living relative. And I thought how much it would have meant for her if I had just gone and been there and held her hand and tried to communicate in any way I could, how much it would have meant. And when I started my business, when I was just starting, there's a whole story about how the business had financial ups and downs, but I was almost near bankruptcy, and somebody sent me a letter, and they said to me, I want you to know I've been using your card to communicate with my grandmother who has a stroke and is aphasic in a nursing home, and how it makes all the difference to keeping that connection with my grandmother, and I thought to myself, wow, if I never make, if I never make another dime, it's worth it just for this letter to know that I've kind of in some ways, made up for that loss to my grandmother. And so that's motivated me to think, wow, right now, huge numbers of people get strokes. It's the #1 cause of permanent disability in the United States. #1 cause. #3 cause of fatalities. And so much of them can just be stopped by people understanding this. So my big, hairy, audacious goal is, can I get that number to be 9 out of 10? Or even 2 out of 10 to start, and then 3 out of 10. And so, coming back to visual language, this is a card that I'm producing. It's a prototype. It'll be a wallet card, which would literally be about the size of a credit card, slightly bigger, so it would pop out behind your credit card. And on one side, it basically tells you what a big deal stroke is. The second thing it does is it explains that 3-hour window. Then it gives you little things of what to be aware of. But then the real magic is there's 3 things, and if you get nothing more from this talk today, just remember these 3 things. If you see somebody and you ask them to smile and they can't do a symmetric smile, call 911. If that person can't speak, their speech is slurry, call 911. And third, just say grandma, uncle, aunt, raise your arms. If they can't raise their arms, if they drift a little bit, call 911. If every American either knew those 3 things or was willing to keep something in their wallet, on their iPad, wherever, that reminded them of that, the ROI in terms of health outcome could be huge, really huge. And that's just America. So Kwikpoint is an organization today. We have a really simple mission. It's to create visual language tools that save lives and lessen suffering. That's simple. This is our corporate logo on the left side. It's 5 children circling the planet, all symbolically, of diverse skin colors, but all of her purple hearts. Because, ultimately, one of the things I learned on my bike trip is we're really all the same. We may speak different languages and have different stories, but ultimately, the essence of what's being human transcends all language barriers and all cultures. And then I say communication is the key to world peace. And I believe that that's the first step, whether you're being able to ask, where a bomb is or how to give me better health care or to understand anything. If you can't communicate, how can you change? And lastly, I recently noticed that the word heart and the word earth, if written in a circle, is the same word. And I thought that was just curious. So I've just been playing with that image a little bit. And with that, I'll end.
All right. Thank you very much. So we are going to go into a little Q&A, but before I do, I just want to hit you with a round of something we do here at the Motley Fool usually when we're interviewing, just a round of buy, sell, or hold. So I want to ask you some questions, or give you some topics, and you tell us if you would buy, sell, or hold the concept of each of them. And let's start with a little softball one here. How about infographics?
Buy.
I would figure as much. And we use them a lot as a media company. We don't. We're not so much person to purpose as much as trying to get the full concept of how to do something as trying to break down what is happening and all that. And so this is something we utilize here as well. Something else we're trying to get into more is getting into some more of the mobile devices and tablet devices. So if I saw or hold the Kwikpoint iPad apps.
We're focusing on EPUBs, not so much apps, and they're all under development.
Excellent. Excellent. Can you take a minute, I mean, just between these buy, sell, or holds real quick, can you talk at all to the production approach that you used here? Laminated cards, folded up, you didn't use books, you didn't use staples. Is there any strategic reasoning behind that?
Yeah, so we purposely use this map-like approach. We use different substrates. Sometimes we use laminated, sometimes we use synthetic, waterproof paper. But there's this term I like to use called spatial adjacency. And that means that when you put things next to each other, it's a lot easier for the eye to move across. The best example I can is think of is that, has anyone ever used one of those turn your page little map atlases? You know, they're 3 by 5 inches, and it goes continued on road B7, and you're driving a car and you're trying to get to B7 to get to Ohio, and you can't find B7 and you end up in New Jersey, you know, that kind of thing. Well, that's because spatial adjacency is not working well for you right there. And so that's why we sort of enjoy, a lot of people still find a nice big old map that you lay out over a table has advantages over different things. So we found that by using map-like content, and just the eye can move a lot faster across ideas than it can. As soon as I have to either touch a button or turn a page, you've added a cognitive load for me, and you've now taken away from my primary purpose. So that's the main reason we use this sort of like widespread approach most of the time.
Excellent, thank you. And let me just close out here by saying I think we all in here will agree that the world is a better place for you taking that bike ride and coming up with this conclusive idea to build a business on. But do you think the world is ready for unicycle jousting? Buy, sell, or hold unicycle jousting?
Well, that's why that idea came next. But quite honestly, I mean, could you imagine, right? People on unicycles, maybe not so much jousting, but you know those big foam rubber Bertaka thingies, and you're just trying to knock the other person down? I think that would be kind of fun. And how hard would it be to get some people that already know how to unicycle, give them that, and just offer them a prize? But I don't know if I'm the right company for that much fun. Maybe you guys could take it on.
Let's open it up to the audience and see if we have any questions coming in from the audience.
All right, Mr. Shedler. Alan, that was really impressive. You started out early saying that your concept is so simple even a caveman could do it. But I'm sure that's not quite the case. There's something special about the skills and capabilities of your team. How would you describe the essence of what your guys are really good at in terms of skills and capabilities?
I would say simplification. We're really good at trying to understand the essence of what you're trying to do, and then really good at simply communicating that essence. You know, the name of our brand is Kwikpoint, and the essence of so many applications today are about speed and accuracy. So we're all about getting you quickly to the point, and I think that really is our art form, the simplicity in design, simplicity in actuation.
Yeah. And just a quick follow-up, how many folks do you have on your team?
About 20.
About 20, got it. Thank you.
And as a side note to that, we're in very much a grow mode. We're about to double our space. We're moving down the street on King Street onto Prince Street. So if anyone knows people out there looking for cool companies to work for, keep us in mind.
Except unless they're working here.
Well, that's what I said. I said knows. Yeah, exactly.
Is your bicycle trip written up anywhere that we can read?
Sorry?
Is your bicycle trip written up somewhere online?
It's actually written up. There's a piece there. So I'll show you what we're giving out. This works. There's a few handouts here. This one, we just hit our 20th anniversary, so everything I just told you actually can just be read in a few minutes in this piece. It's the presentation you just saw, more or less. Then there's also a sample of one of the ones we did for the Olympics I just showed you. There's the health card, the TV poster. And lastly, just so you know what this is, when I did the bike trip around the world for peace, I came up with a basic message which I wrote up and I translated in different languages and handed out all over the world, thinking, you know, just say what you want and let people read it. And this is the message from my bike trip 20 years ago. So,
Very good. Oh, follow-up. What was the, is there differences between the Iraq and the Afghanistan IED stuff?
Yes.
I mean,
in Afghanistan, they're much more focused on homemade explosives, which use basically fertilizers, primarily ammonium nitrate for the explosive components. In Iraq, they have a lot of old Soviet weaponry, so they're mostly repurposing old Soviet military. So yeah, very significant difference.
That was the basic one. Do you find that there are cultural differences in pictures? And do you do like cultural testing to say, this, I don't know, that chicken doesn't look like that in China?
Yes.
That's
one
not
of my
a good example. But.
favorite examples was we had to indicate, in Afghanistan, sometimes a bomb could be hidden in the garbage. So we had to figure out, well, what does garbage look like in Afghanistan? And we actually went to, it was like a local Afghan restaurant not far from here, and we found some busboys who more or less, so to speak, just got off the boat from Afghanistan, and we did SME interviews for them. They were the SMEs on what garbage looks like in rural Afghanistan. And it was pretty different. I mean, for them to throw something away in a country like that, it has to be so broken, damaged, and useless. And we finally came up with, I think it was like a bottle with the bottom broken, a plastic bag with no handle and holes in the bottom. I mean, it was like there were a few things that iconically said garbage in Afghanistan versus, you know, in America, right.
Did you have any trouble? You know that you said that a military officer came to you guys about creating a VLT for them. Was there any hurdles to adoption? Because I know it can be, you know, military development program goes on years before something gets put in the field. But this seems like it was a pretty quick turnaround.
There were definitely challenges to adoption that. I think we got something from sort of first contact to standard issue in probably a 12 to 24 month period, which is incredibly fast for the U.S. military. But yeah, what I think we had going in our favor was, one, how important it is that it was, two, how simple it was, and probably how inexpensive it was. These things, you know, sell for, you know, a few dollars compared to most things the military buys. In fact, they sometimes looked at it and were like, huh, where are the zeros? Because it kind of, I remember one captain, a naval captain, which is an 06, had about a $2 billion budget, and he did about $1 million program with us. And he said to me, you know, of the $2 billion I've spent, this $1 million has gotten me the best ROI in terms of impact of anything that we've done. And he said, you know, I'd like to put that in a letter for you, but I'd lose my stripes, but I just want you to know that. And so,
I think we have time for one more. Yeah, what role does like feedback and revision play in your guys' process? Is there ever a time when you put a product out and you hear from the soldiers, look, this just isn't working, I can't communicate with this, and so you think back to the drawing board?
So inherently our developmental process is, the simple way to think about it is, you know, think, try, test. You think about something, you try it, you test it, and then you keep going through that. And so we have different levels of rounds. The last round is field testing. And typically by the time it gets to the field, it's been through a lot. And so we've never had something quite like you described, but we have learned things. Probably the best example was around, and it goes back to your question on cultural sensitivity. That body chart you saw had flesh-colored skin. When it went out to Afghanistan, a lot of people found it pornographic to see a human form, even free of, you know, the private parts, in kind of naked skin color. And they said people won't look at this because it's too, you know, so they said you have to make it a non-natural color. So we redesigned it and used blue. So if you looked at one of our Afghan medical cards, you'd say, wow, is that like ET you're trying to diagnose? But that's the reason. And so that's an example of that.
Very good. Everybody, thank you for being here today, and let's give a big hand to Alan Stillman.